Hi, good morning everyone. I wish I could actually see you, but unfortunately I can't be with you in person today. So I am recording my message to you from my home in East London, Beacon Bay. It's a beautiful sunny day. I'm sure you can see behind me the lovely blue sky. And that is a jungle gym that my children, I have 3 children that at home, 2 teenagers and a little 7-year-old. So I hope you've all enjoyed the conference so far. And it's an important theme. It's a very important, crucial discussion that we are having. And I've been asked to talk to you, to share some of my experiences as a deafblind person. Now, some of you looking at me right now might think, really? A deafblind person? But as we will uncover during this talk, and I'm sure most of you attending this conference realize this, just like with deafness, so too with blindness, and also even more so with deafblindness, it's a spectrum, ranging from people with a mild hearing loss and a mild vision loss combined to those who are completely deaf and completely blind. And as I will share later on, you will get a better sense, I hope, of where do I fit into the spectrum, and understand perhaps how does someone like me experience deafblindness, and as we will be exploring today, how to hold on to identity and find purpose as a deafblind person in a post-COVID world. The prolonged hard lockdown brought on by the COVID pandemic profoundly impacted the way in which people interact socially, with heightened levels of anxiety and depression prevalent across all sectors of society. The deaf-blind community in particular has felt this impact acutely. Deaf-blindness is a unique disability where the combination of both hearing and vision loss impact on every aspect of society and of life. It is a wide-ranging spectrum, hugely diverse, embracing a combination of mild hearing loss plus mild vision loss through to being totally blind and totally deaf, or a combination of degrees of severity of both vision and hearing loss. It affects a person's overall ability to be mobile, access information, and communicate effectively. Because one sense cannot adequately compensate for the loss of the other sense, people who are deaf-blind face unique and often complex challenges. It is also important to appreciate that the simple fact that a deaf-blind individual may have the privilege of being able to make effective use of a range of assistive devices, including cochlear implants, and I wear a cochlear implant, and powerful hearing aids, prescription glasses like I wear, white canes, I also have a white cane, and guide dogs. I'm in the process of acquiring a guide dog, which is actually the main reason why I could not be with you today, does not in itself mean that the barriers faced by a deaf-blind person are removed. Not at all. While the person may certainly be assisted and enjoy a greater access and independence to all of life, there remain significant, crucial, vital challenges. And we also have to acknowledge losses, real, impactful losses, both physical and, more pertinently, emotional, psychosocial, that need to be understood. They need to be appreciated when interacting and seeking to assist a deaf-blind person. The advent of the COVID hard lockdown exacerbated to an extreme degree the often pervading sense of isolation and, to varying degrees, dependence on others in order to function fully and access the resources of life. This is the defining feature of life with a deafblind person. The insistence on wearing of masks and the legal injunction against socializing outside of one's own home, even with one's broader family and closest friends in any form, only serve to propel the already innate isolation and exclusion that many deafblind people experience to an extreme degree. My wife is deaf. She relies completely on lip reading to interact with others. She cannot get any help from hearing aids, and cochlear implants are no option for her. I, on the other hand, do get considerable help from my cochlear implant and wearing the most powerful hearing aid that is currently available on the market. But even I have battled to follow conversations and dialogue when out in public, with lips hidden behind the masks. It did not help us either when the rules were slightly relaxed and people started to lower their masks because of the requirement for people to maintain a distance from each other. I am legally blind. It is impossible for me to read lips from a distance, even with my assistive devices on. Devices which are often not very effective, as we all know, when in a noisy environment, and where sight becomes a key factor to facilitate efficient communication, which is all well and fine, except when one's vision is also severely impaired. And that is a challenge for a deafblind person. When both senses are severely affected, one has to back up. One has no backup to help ensure effective understanding and clarity in communication. I would like to paint a picture with a few real-life examples of what I have experienced during the hard lockdown, that for the first time since my vision began to deteriorate dramatically about 5 years ago, fueled my identity that, for practical purposes, I was no longer only a person with dual sensory impairment, but I was, in the most practical sense, a deaf-blind person. Before I do that, though, let me briefly tell you something about my own background and journey with dual sensory loss. I suffered oxygen deprivation at birth. I was born dead. I had a 0 APGAR score. It took several minutes to resuscitate me. I was airlifted to another hospital in another town, where I was placed on life support with no muscle tone. In my first night of life, I experienced several seizures, each one lasting up to 12 minutes. I eventually recovered my muscle tone and was able to come home. My mother picked up what she believed to be a hearing loss when I was 2 years old, but doctors dismissed her, insisting to my parents that I was, in their words, retarded, and they advised my parents to place me in a special needs home. I am so grateful that my parents chose to ignore this advice. I was only correctly diagnosed as being deaf at the age of 5 and received my first pair of hearing aids just before my 6th birthday, at which point, for the first time in my life, I learned how to speak with my voice and to read. My parents chose to mainstream school me. At the age of 12, I started to wear glasses, having not seen well for quite some time before then. After I had finished school, I enrolled at the University of Cape Town eventually graduating with a master's degree in religious studies, followed by a postgraduate diploma in journalism from Rhodes University. A wonderfully rewarding few years as a researcher with DeafNet Centre of Knowledge, based at the National Institute for the Deaf in Worcester, followed, where among my responsibilities, I helped design courses and lead training in leadership and management for deaf people across Africa. For the last 10 years, I have been a senior sub-editor with the Daily Dispatch, a leading regional newspaper based in the Eastern Cape. Around 2016, I started to notice a significant decline in both my hearing and my vision. It happened simultaneously. Even though my deafness is sensory neural, caused by oxygen deprivation, my hearing had been progressively declining over several years, to the point that I had become bilaterally profoundly deaf by 2018. In April 2019, I acquired a cochlear implant for my left ear. A few months earlier, I had had a routine eye test, which showed that my vision over the space of just 4 years had dramatically declined from a visual acuity of 20/50 in my better eye to 20/200 in my better eye, and I was now both profoundly deaf and legally blind. My periphery vision had also been hit hard, with 2 separate tests confirming that I have a field vision of 30 degrees in one eye and 20 degrees remaining in my other eye. As a deafblind person, the COVID hard lockdown was a challenging time. Given that I still get good use from the assistive devices that I use for my hearing, and I still have residual sight, I have a deep appreciation and empathy for those in our community, our deafblind community, who experience a greater degree of dual sensory impairment in trying to navigate the barriers imposed not only by COVID and the hard lockdowns, but also the social impact that remains, that is a direct consequence of the COVID lockdowns. Many of my own social barrier experiences centered around trips to the shops, to the malls, and having to negotiate interaction with the retailers and their staff, most of whom were not trained in or sensitized to deal appropriately with people who are either deaf or blind, let alone who are deafblind. The insistence on wearing of masks was the greatest physical communication barrier, as it negated any ability to lip or to speech read. Even when the restrictions were lessened and some people became willing to lower or even remove their masks, there remained the barrier imposed by distance or opaque screens, which in itself obscured vision. For a deafblind person, proximity to enable touch, and for people with low vision, like myself, visual cues are vitally key. COVID further made the natural human instinct of touch, of intimacy, not only a no-go, or at best frowned upon, but ultimately seemingly something that was inherently, in its very self, wrong. Even now that things have become more natural and normal again, there's no real sense of things feeling fully normal. I continue to find that many people I encounter continue to respond to me with unease and awkwardness when placed in a social situation where human touch would ordinarily have been expected, even reciprocated. For a deafblind person, the impact of this is, of course, to exacerbate that sense that is innately there of being socially isolated, not understood, and often excluded, if not out of a lack of compassion, but more often due to a lack of understanding and awareness, indeed an unexpressed but no less obvious fear when confronted with deafblindness. What to do? What to say? What is right? What is wrong? How can people function, let alone be happy, be fulfilled, fully be human, if their senses are not what the world has deemed normal? During the hard lockdown, there was also the injunction to not mingle with people outside of one's immediate household. One could not attend church services, sport gatherings, no social visits. Families were also disrupted, with suddenly hardened levels preventing even members of immediate families who happened to be in a different province at the time that a level was suddenly raised, being able to return home to their loved ones. Support networks were eroded, with a knock-on effect for all, but especially for deafblind people, being a growing sense of despair, of loneliness, isolation, and often a sense of depression, anxiety, even post-traumatic stress. Even now, with COVID restrictions largely relaxed and the world having returned to a much more greater sense of normalcy, the psychosocial effects of the hard lockdowns continue to impact and prevail. This is not surprising when one considers the extended time frame in which deafblind people have had to endure a hardening of their already isolating and often dependent realities, with much of the support networks and care systems that were in place pre-COVID either now gone or greatly eroded. Trust in the safety and security of what one can anticipate has been hit hard, and with it, hope. That critical essence that allows one to carry on, to live positively, despite one's challenges, has become a harder notion to hold on to. People who know me well have described me as an optimist, a person who comes across as positive and hopeful. I have been described as someone who inspires with my approach to life's challenges. I am a man of deep faith. Some have asked me how it is that I maintain my faith, my hope, after having endured so many personal losses, including the untimely deaths of my first wife and 2 of my children, over and above the daily impact of living with progressive deafblindness. I'm not always sure how to answer this. The truth is that one can have faith and simultaneously feel fear. One can have hope while feeling despondent and sad. One can be an optimist while at the same time feeling anxious about the future. One can feel grateful for the gifts of technology, of assistive devices, guide dogs, the institutes for the deaf and the blind, and all the myriad of services that exist to support and enhance the quality of life for the deaf, the deafblind, and the deafblind communities, while at the same time experiencing grief, trauma, as one comes to terms with the very real losses that accumulate, especially for those who experience sensory loss later in life, and even more especially where it affects to a severe to profound extent both one's vision and one's hearing. My deafness, while caused by oxygen deprivation at birth, and as such should not have deteriorated, has proven progressive and become bilaterally profound in recent years. I do not know what the cause of this progression is. My vision loss is caused by a progressive or malignant high myopia. There is no cure or recognized treatment for it. Within 6 years, my visual acuity dropped from 20/50 in my better eye to 20/200 in both eyes. And my peripheral vision is also very, very poor, as I mentioned earlier. This is, of course, a rapid deterioration, and much of it happened during these COVID years. While trying to make sense of and adapt to my changing reality, for 2 years I did not have the support structure of my church, being able to be with my closest friends, or even to be physically present with either of my parents who happened to live outside of my own province. Being legally blind, I am no longer able to drive, and I had to walk everywhere during the hard lockdown. Currently, with such restrictions no longer in place, I am able to either take a boat or, if I am lucky, to get lifts with friends. But clearly, that is far from ideal, with the costs of boats and taxis not sustainable, and one cannot always call on even one's closest friends to help out. Not being able to drive is a very big deal. When one loses one's right or ability to drive safely, one loses a major part of one's freedom and liberty. I am a proud person, and I don't like to be reliant on other people for anything. With each month that passes, I find myself experiencing increasingly a feeling of grief at what has already been taken from me, that continues to be taken from me, and what all of this means not only for myself, but also for my family, because we have to acknowledge the impact on the broader family. Helen Keller said, when one door of happiness closes, another opens. But often we look so long at the closed door that we do not see the one which has been opened for us. That is such a powerful, impactful insight. It compels us to earnestly ask ourselves as deafblind people, who am I? Am I still me? In the face of devastating loss and sudden change, and how can I live an empowered and fulfilling life, holding on to hope, in a world that seems determined to isolate the already isolated even further? For me, sport has been a sanctuary that has helped me to navigate the changing tides of life. As a deaf person who was not yet legally blind, I had the immense privilege of competing at the first World Deaf Athletics Championships and then the 2009 Deaf Olympics, both times in the marathon. I found myself involved with the South African Deaf Rugby Union as a founding president, and then in 2015 serving as team manager against the world champions Wales in 2 tests that took place in Pretoria. Having always been deaf since birth, I feel it is important to emphasize that I have never had a personal issue, a psychological difficulty with my deafness. While it did impact me growing up on many levels, the fact of it being deaf in itself was nothing more than just a simple fact, a part of me, something I embraced and really just carried on with my life. I enjoyed the fact that it opened up doors to exciting sport experiences, and I loved and I thrived in my career with the National Institute for the Deaf in Worcester. For the most part, I saw the deafness as not a blessing. No, not a blessing. But not an issue either. It just was. It just was. For me personally, it is the vision loss, the rapid decline in my sight, and the continuing deterioration that hits me hard. And it is a combined effect, having become deafblind, that has woken up in me a far more acute awareness of the impact of what I live with every day, and how it impacts on so much of what I had previously, when only deaf, for the most part not even noticed. When I was first told that I was now legally blind, my ophthalmologist suggested to me that I look into taking part in parasport. Soon I found myself competing in paracycling, paratriathlon, ultimately gaining national selection in both sports and winning an Africa Triathlon bronze medal as a vision-impaired athlete. I have represented my province in blind cricket at 2 national tournaments. Earlier this year, I also broke 2 South African para-athletics records for my blind class for the marathon and the 50-kilometer race. To paraphrase Helen Keller, I saw the door of happiness, of opportunity that opened for me when I had crossed that threshold into legal blindness. And I certainly have strived to seek out the blessings that truly are there as a deaf-blind person. And yet, Helen Keller again once said that blindness cuts us off from things, but deafness cuts us off from people. For Keller, it was far worse to be deaf than blind. Quoting Keller again, the problems of deafness are deeper and more complex, if not more important, than those of blindness. For her, she said, deafness is much more a misfortune. I feel differently. I have always been deaf, and even as I became profoundly deaf later on in life, I have never known sound in the conventional sense, so for me being deaf is a natural state of being. For me, it is infinitely more debilitating to be even legally blind, and thus still have some residual sight. It is an unsettling prospect of becoming increasingly blind, which I know I will, and am, with the frequent acquisition of a guide dog, doing my best to prepare for. I cannot, however, fathom how I will cope when, if, I become completely blind. It is difficult to live out that positivity that Helen Keller embodies in her desire to see the door that opens when the lights and sounds grow even more dim and still. So who am I? And am I still me? I am Tim. I am deaf-blind. And yes, becoming deaf-blind has changed me and will continue to change me as I strive to seek out new doors of opportunity while also acknowledging the loss. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.